you have to give a lot of thought to not only your transitions and to connecting your thoughts together, but sometimes just a quick overview. You got to keep referring back to that picture in the box. When you put something together from IKEA. I mean, I don't know guys that read. My son-in-law probably is an instruction reader, but I'm a picture on the box kind of guy.
Yeah.
And so I think when you're preaching the message, that you got to frequently give them that picture on the box, and it allows them to track with you from point to point. So that's an area I think, guys, that they don't connect those thoughts.
Right. Hey, welcome to the Expositors Collective Podcast, episode 137. I'm your host, Mike Neglia. Hey, so if you are a regular listener to the podcast, you know that Tuesdays are when we release new episodes. But from time to time, on a Thursday or a Friday, we'll drop these bonus episodes. And the bonus episodes have one thing in common. They're always high quality content, and they're somewhat low quality audio. So while it might not be up to scratch quality-wise from the audio level to merit a Tuesday release, for me, I've just got to get this content out there because I want you to hear from this as well too. So this was recorded, I think, in July of 2018 in Waterford, Ireland. And it's myself and Pastor Ted Leavenworth, pastor of Reliance Church in Temecula, California. Ted is an incredibly thoughtful, insightful, pithy, quotable man. And he and I speak about the mistakes that new preachers tend to make. And if you are a new preacher, or if you know a new preacher, I want to make sure that you listen to this and pass it on to someone who can benefit from this. Now, while you're listening and before the episode starts, let me just say, our webinar is coming up on Saturday morning, December 5th, 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. We have Thomas Terry, lead pastor of the Trinity Church in Portland, Oregon. He's going to be speaking to us for about a half hour, and then we're going to have a time of Q&A. So make sure you go to expositorscollective.com, click the link to register on Eventbrite, and please join us for our third ever webinar, December 5th, 9 a.m., Thomas Terry. And I hope that this bonus episode and our regular episodes and our webinars, they all work together to help you grow in your personal study and your public proclamation of God's Word. God bless. Hi, welcome to the Expositors Collective Podcast. I am in a hotel room in Waterford with Ted Leavenworth. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks, Mike.
Why are we here?
You want to know what my first sermon was like?
Yes. So Ted, what can you remember? Like, how long ago was your first sermon? What was the situation, and how did it go?
So, first sermon was in probably 1994, and it was for my senior pastor who was going to be out of town, so he invited me to teach for him.
Okay.
And my mom and I thought it went great. The church was very encouraging, and I had occasion to listen to the message about 5 years ago. Somebody found a copy of it, and I promptly burned it. It was painful.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why?
I wasn't comfortable in my own skin. The content was not unbiblical, so I had that going for me, So that was good. But it was painful just because I was awkward, and my transitions it was kind of like learning how to drive a stick shift uphill kind of thing. Yeah.
Do you remember what was your main point, or what passage did you preach from? Do you remember that?
I taught on the story of David and Goliath.
Okay. Okay.
I tried to include too much information. I tried to put 50 pounds in a 25-pound sack.
Yeah.
So that was in, covering a lot of backstory and, 2 chapters.
Yeah.
Trying to fit it all in. So yeah, there were a lot of mistakes.
Because chapter 17, there's a lot of verses in there. There's a lot of stuff there.
Right.
And then of course you got it. Yeah. Well, I taught that. It wasn't my first sermon.
Right.
But it was one of the early sermons that I did, and I remember I just happened. This is before like the internet was accessible. I shouldn't.
Now they're immortalized for all eternity.
Well, yeah, but I mean, as far as like research, so I was living in Ireland at a very small library. We didn't have. I had a laptop with no Wi-Fi connection.
Right.
This is back in like 04. 05.
Right.
So internet existed,
yes.
Just not in my house.
Yes.
And so I wasn't able to just kind of look things up willy-nilly. But it just so happened that I caught a show on television about David and Goliath, late in the night, and they were just talking about ancient warfare, actually.
Okay.
So it's ancient warfare, and they were talking about catapults, and they also talked about spears back in the day. And it kind of referenced that in the story of the Bible, Goliath had a long spear, and that probably in those days there'd be a leather strap, and the strap wraps around the spear, and so you hold on to the leather and throw it, and it spins the spear, so extra velocity.
Right.
And I just couldn't believe the Lord organized that to bless me with that extra information. And so I just was watching it. I was scribbling notes, and I made sure that every detail made its way into the sermon that Sunday, so people knew that when it says Goliath had a long spear, what that meant.
Yeah.
And so I explained to them velocity and leather straps and everything.
Wow.
Turns out they weren't actually that blessed by it.
Right. Yeah, we geek out on stuff and the minutia of details, but people don't necessarily care about that.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, after I gave the message, I had a guy in the congregation that the Lord had done a miraculous work and ministered to his heart despite my efforts, I think. And then he came up to me to talk to me afterwards, and he was kind of choked up, and I didn't have the discernment to realize that this was a really broken man and what he was going through. And it was, guys, they don't open up. They start talking to you about something, and you really have to, they want to talk to you, but they won't open up about it, So the word did its job and got to this guy's heart, and he came up to talk to me, but I didn't pick up on it. I was, on the preacher side, just giving my message, and he was saying, "Oh, that was a really good message." I was like, "Oh, thank you so much for that encouragement." Not picking up on the fact that that's a really good message God spoke to me, and I really need some counsel right now. So I missed an opportunity there, but fortunately regained that opportunity a couple weeks later with him, so that was good. But message was painful.
Yeah. So it's interesting to hear that the message wasn't that great, but obviously God used it to minister to somebody. And then how did that work that you preached again?
God's grace. I didn't do, we're always harder on ourselves than other people are. So we hear something and we think, oh, that was horrible. I think the reason I was able to teach again was because I didn't teach heresy. I taught the word. I did a good job, expositing the text. And so, thanks in part to Alan Redpath. And,
yeah.
I didn't have the internet either when we put it together. I mean, it didn't exist when I put my first message together. So, but I did have The Making of a Man of God by Alan Redpath. So that was informative for me, and hopefully the Holy Spirit a little bit. So.
Yeah, he's there too. That's a good book.
Yeah.
And I remember in that passage on David and Goliath, he actually he speaks about what all the trendy preachers are talking about now, that it's there's that Jesus defeats the ultimate Goliath and the ultimate of Satan, sin, and death. That was in Redpath's book. It's not this new discovery. Did that make it into your sermon?
Probably not.
Yeah, that's not it. Okay, so those are some, I guess, you mentioned a mistake of you used too much information.
Yeah.
And so did I. What are some mistakes that you think that new preachers often make?
Well, it will start there. They try and fit every single little subtle nuance that they got in their study time, and they try to pack it into their message. So that's a mistake. Disjointed, disconnected thoughts. I tell my students that preaching and the messages that you preach, they're for hearers, they're not for readers.
Right.
And so we as readers, we read, and we get to the end of the page. It happens to us often. We just can't remember what we read. We weren't really paying attention, and we have the luxury of going back and rereading.
Yeah.
But your hearers don't do that, and so if you lose them, you've lost them, and they just tune out. They check out. They start counting the ceiling tiles, and so I think new guys have a tendency to not keep that in mind, and it is you have to give a lot of thought to not only your transitions and to connecting your thoughts together, but sometimes just a quick overview. You got to keep referring back to that picture in the box. When you put something together from IKEA. I mean, I don't know guys that read. My son-in-law probably is an instruction reader, but I'm a picture on the box kind of guy.
Yeah.
And so I think when you're preaching the message, that you got to frequently give them that picture on the box, and it allows them to track with you from point to point. So that's an area I think guys that they don't connect those thoughts.
Right. And maybe in the beginning of our sermons, we might say, here's what we looked at last week. We might summarize last week as if we're teaching through a story, perhaps, or a narrative. Right. But I think it's really important to do that, not just from week to week, but even from point to point.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because then hey, we're talking about, and you restate the big idea or whatever it is, and we've seen that this and so with that in mind, one of the other things that we see is this, and it just brings them along with you, and those reviews are helpful. Yeah. I think another mistake too that I see guys make is that they may be heavily influenced by someone, whether it's the pastor that they teach under, or most often it's the guys that they're frequently listening to their podcasts,
right?
And it sounds like they're channeling those guys, and whether it's because they've just lifted too much information and leaned too heavily on the commentary, or if it's just that they pick up and just mimic a lot of who that influencer is in their life, or influencers, and that can be a mistake because they're just channeling somebody else's idea and material. So that's problematic as well.
You said that your first sermon, you weren't comfortable in your own skin.
Yeah. Does
that mean that you were channeling somebody else, or just an awkward version of Ted Leavenworth?
Ted Leavenworth's awkward, So it was awkwardness, it was uncomfortableness, it was fright and fear, and people pick up on that. If the speaker is uncomfortable, the listeners are going to be uncomfortable. It's just a guaranteed. Right. And so, and the only way out of that is time and repetition and getting comfortable by teaching. But I think that, toward that end, preaching in the pulpit probably shouldn't be early in the process of your preaching experience.
Right.
Teaching a home fellowship, leading different classes, discipleship groups, things like that. Speaking in front of people helps you immensely, and so I think that's good too.
Yeah, and the more you do it, the less nervous you are. But it's unfortunate. Yeah, there's ways to do it in smaller groups, but you're just probably going to be awkward and nervous no matter what.
Yeah, and it helped too when I taught in front of my church for the first time, and our church was maybe 150 people. Okay. And so with a church that size, everybody knows you. They're very encouraging. They're tolerant of your mistakes and so on. It's when the church gets a little bit bigger and the people don't know you, they're a little less forgiving, and so on. Stakes go up. I think.
So to review.
Yes.
So you were saying the mistakes have to do with too much information. Copying other people.
Right. Yeah. I think, too, another big mistake that people make is that they get more familiar with their notes than they are with the text.
Yeah, okay.
we have that burden of, man, I got to say something. I've been asked to preach. I have to say something. It has to be awesome. And really you have to get to the place where you actually have something to say first, and then focusing on that. So guys rush too quickly to put their notes together.
Okay.
And so, when you do that, you really haven't taken the time to have the text really saturate your heart and your mind. And so that can be a big problem.
And do you have kind of a rule of thumb? How do you let the text saturate your mind?
Yeah, well, that goes to my sermon prep.
Yeah.
And my entire, for me, I ideally my sermon prep is on Mondays and Tuesdays. It won't be this week. I'm in Ireland. I won't get back until Tuesday, so it'll be Tuesday and Wednesday. And with jet lag, it'll be Thursday as well. But normally it's Monday, Tuesday, and I dedicate all of Monday to what I call soaking in the text. So it's just a matter of I'm writing stuff down, but there's no organization to it. I'm just writing down thoughts and ideas and things that stand out to me, questions that I have, observations that I make, and things like that. And so I'm just reading through the text. I read it, I reread it. I'm reading it in different translations. And if I'm stuck on something, if I'm really just having a hard time, like getting my head around it, I might consult the commentaries earlier in the process just to help me to make sure that I'm getting the right take on it. And so that whole process, that's all of Monday. Monday is just all of that. And sometimes it's a gift. God will give you. You'll get your whole sermon outline quickly. Immediately. You read through the first time, and
sure.
You're like, oh, I know exactly what the big idea is and what the process of this flow of thought. How I'm gonna, you might even get, how I'm gonna teach through it, and you might even get in that, illustration, application, things like that. But usually, all of that comes on Tuesday. So Monday is just soaking in the text, getting my head around the text. Getting a general sense of, where the text is going and, context and all of that. And then Tuesday is, all right, let's put together my outline.
Okay.
So, and then, in the outline, I know several guys, they're chronological thinkers, and they just cannot get past, putting together an introduction before they start working on everything else. Again, I tell my students, I think that's a mistake, because sometimes you come up with an introduction, you fall in love with it, and then through the course of study you realize that really isn't the best introduction to the text. So then you spend all your time trying to make the text fit to flow with your introduction, tweaking stuff unnaturally, and that can get to a real problem where you're not exegeting the text.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you about that.
Okay.
Why are introductions important? So what if the introduction doesn't match the text?
Yeah.
Isn't it just an interesting story to make sure people are listening?
No, because, an introduction accomplishes a lot of things. Sometimes an introduction is, hey, let's read the text. And I know, David Guzik thinks that, you should get to the text early, keeping that the main point. Hey, let's communicate that the message is central.
And you can listen to him explain that on episode 2 of the Expositors Collective podcast. But
and I agree with him, but I think that when people listen to you, when you go into any sermon, really people are asking, so what? Yeah. The question of their heart is, why should I care? Why is this important? And I think that your introduction really ought to grab them by the throat. It ought to be something to where you've got them, and they're making up their minds whether or not they're going to listen to you within the first 10 seconds of your communication. And no pressure, but that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
So if you take the time to communicate, a proper introduction. Your proper introduction should tell them what the big idea of the text is, so that they have a foundational understanding of what it is that they're going to be learning. It's standard. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you, then I'm going to tell you what I told you.
Right.
And so the introduction should serve as, hey, this is what we're talking about today, but it also should do that in such a way that the listener understands this is why you should pay attention. And so it's important.
So if you tell a heartwarming story about your kids, and then, you say, and we're going to talk about hope,
right?
And here's a story about my kids hoping for a good Christmas present. But points 1, 2, and 3 are about, let's say, perseverance, suffering, and joy in adversity.
Yeah.
Do you think that there's going to be people that object, that say, hey, wait a minute, I was promised hope, but you've given me perseverance and joy in adversity?
Yeah, and so if again, you should handle that and treat that in such a way that either your introduction, you have to address the inconsistencies, and so if you were flowing through that kind of a thing, and where the ultimate wraparound is going to come to hope,
okay,
but these are the adversity and so on are things that precede it, and you actually have to deal with those.
Yes.
Then your introduction could be one of hope and heartwarming and all of that, and then you deal with that in your transition from the introduction to the text, because you could say that, and then you might say something like, this is I tell you that story because we're going to ultimately be dealing with hope.
Yeah.
But you might not think so in the very beginning. Yeah. We're going to face adversity. We're going to face trial, and you can deal with that but it has to be something that you think through. So as you're teaching, as you're instructing your people, you constantly have to be asking the question, not only why should I care, but also what are the reasonable objections that your hearers are going to have.
Sure.
So as you're teaching the text, you have to answer those. You have to say, ultimately this is a story of hope, but it starts with, this hardship or trial or whatever. And so really, how can the hope come from that? Well, let me tell you how that hope can, and I know what you're thinking, you throw those things out. So.
Okay. So I'm asking more nuanced questions of you because you are not only a pastor and church planter, but you also have taught a class on hermeneutics or homiletics? Homiletics. So these nuanced questions you're getting the more tricky, nuanced ones.
Yeah.
Okay. Could I ask you about illustrations?
Yeah.
Why? I guess I kind of interrupted you a little bit in the middle of your sermon prep process, but is there a time when you compile your illustrations together? Does that come in the kind of warp and woof of prep, or do you have on Wednesdays at 2 p.m, I find my illustrations?
Yeah, no, illustrations. For me,
yeah.
I use illustrations in everyday life.
Yeah.
I kind of communicate that way naturally.
You sure do. Yeah.
And so I don't have any special time carved out. They just sort of come to me. As a matter of fact, probably in my sermon prep, I give too many illustrations, and that's one of the time sucks of my messages, where I say, man, I'm illustrating this 12 ways from Sunday. They get it. Move on. Okay. And sometimes we fall in love with, that's really good. Mm-hmm. Like that paints a really good picture, or that's really funny. That's a great, funny illustration. And sometimes, frankly, people just need a commercial break.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Where you're just feeding them with a fire hose, and they just need a laugh. They just need something to, and that's a fine line too, because you can be somebody who's super funny, just naturally, and which I don't consider myself to be funny, but. Sometimes you have funny illustrations or whatever, and if they leave and that's all they remember, then you've really not done your job. But so illustrations, they just kind of come naturally to me. But I think that, again, an illustration is the picture on the box kind of thing, and more is kind of caught than taught. And if you give an illustration, it communicates so much that people can personally relate with, that they can visually see in their mind's eye, and so I think illustrations are really powerful tools to communicate truth.
Okay. So what if someone's listening and they don't speak in illustration language and it doesn't come naturally to them, and maybe there's a temptation to, well, not temptation. I mean, do you think there's value in 1,001 illustrations for preachers books?
Sure. Yeah, I think there is, but I think that God's created you uniquely to be your own communicator. Like, we all communicate in different ways. And I know guys that are really funny. They have great, and it just comes naturally to them. They're funny, in just spontaneous ways, and that makes it into their sermons in very, wonderful ways, and it's charming and great, and you love watching the sermon. You can never be them. I could never be them.
Right.
So maybe if illustration isn't your thing, you can. There's so many other ways that we can illustrate a text. It could be, a cross reference, that just a story biblically that illustrates very wonderfully the point you want to make, or it could be a powerful quote from somebody who is, quote's not an illustration by definition, but it is a way to further expound on the text. So. I think you be you, and if illustration isn't your thing, I think a sermon needs to have an illustration. You have to be able to say it's kind of like this, and look for ways that you can do that.
Okay. Well, cool. Well, thank you for those two little diversions. So we're on Tuesday now.
Okay.
So you've soaked in the text on Monday. You've consulted maybe a commentary or two on Monday, and then a bunch more on Tuesday. Is that right?
Right. Tuesday morning. Yeah.
Outline is done on Tuesday.
Yeah, and a lot of times I won't consult the commentary until, I've got a lot of my notes done.
Okay.
Sometimes it just all depends. If I have a real strong sense of what the text is saying and how the Holy Spirit is leading me to present that and what angle I'm going to take on the lesson, then without fear I'm going to be able to go to the commentary much earlier.
Okay.
If I'm still in the crafting process, I'm a little more sensitive to going to the commentaries, just because it's going to make its way into your message. And so if you do that too early, then you're going to sound like David Guzik,
right?
Which isn't a bad thing, but if it's, you'd much rather have the Holy Spirit lead
Absolutely.
you. Now, having said that, I mean, there's several times in my teaching, I might have an outline, and I go to a commentary, and I'm like, that explains it much more clearly and much better than this rambling thing that I had.
Sure.
I'm flat out doing that. And there's nothing wrong with that, but yeah. So Tuesday for me, it's starting to get all of my notes compiled. I want to be able to clearly articulate the big idea. I want to make sure that I've set up the message. As you're teaching through a book, so often that part of the process, that introductory part of the process, is a review or a catching up to speed, or just jumping into, hey, we left off at this point kind of thing, and recognizing that not everybody comes every week. It's always a balance on, how much of that am I going to do, and so you don't want to spend so much time in review that everybody is just, well, I heard this.
Right.
So, but yeah, so setting up and your introduction and how you're going to get into the text, setting up your main points, and then just starting to once I get that skeleton done, then I'm going back and I'm putting as Haddon Robinson calls it, the meat on the bones. You're starting to, that's where your cross references, expanding on things, illustrations, application points, and so on.
Wow. Okay. And then are you done?
No, my wife likes to say I'm not done until the first service starts.
Okay.
So no, I mean, I'm done. I try to be completely done by Wednesday morning. That's my goal.
Wow.
I don't always hit it. It all depends on what I've got going on, frankly, in the church. I might have several times that I'm teaching in different class or something that might rob some time from Monday or Tuesday. All depends on how much time I have on Monday and Tuesday.
Okay.
Then, but ideally I'm done by Wednesday morning, and then I won't look at my notes again until Saturday evening.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? Okay.
In fact,
because you're so busy, or intentionally?
Well, both. And well, let me answer your question, and I'll come back to the taking a fresh run at your notes. That's, okay. You can remind me of that if I forget.
I'm writing it down now.
Yeah. you have things that you have to do, and so you have to program your days. And so for me, Wednesdays and Thursdays are programmed with other things. But I also like to if I've got the message done, if I've done a good job on it, then Saturday is sufficient for me to come back to go over them, taking a fresh look. Yeah, you make some tweaks and some changes. Last week I made 2 hours of changes to my notes on Saturday night, and my computer shut down.
No.
Yes, and it's never done it before. It just shut down, and they were lost. And my wife said, "Well, obviously God didn't want you to say it," and He didn't. And everything that I had done,
wow.
It did not. It didn't. When I redid it, it didn't show up the same way. So that's God doing what God does. But anyway, I'll do that on Saturday night, a couple hours. Saturday evening, and then I'll wake up early on Sunday morning, and I like to spend an hour or so on my notes on Sunday morning.
Okay. How early?
It depends. Usually 4:35 in the morning.
Okay.
And spend an hour or so over that before I go down and meet the guys down at the church and for prayer and stuff. So that's how that'll go.
Okay.
Taking fresh runs at the message.
I was just about to remind you.
You can get you get all up in your head and you get all up in your notes, and it's, if you sit there too long, then you just sort of go down a wormhole in your notes, where in the moment your notes make sense to you. But for me, and maybe this is just the way my brain works, I think it's healthy to come away from your notes, to come away from your study, to have some time away. It depends, a half hour, an hour. Often, I'll go and I'll have lunch and I'll come back to my notes, and I just have fresh insight. I just have a fresh take on it.
Yeah.
And so I think rather than, and it works both ways, but what I started off saying is, rather than sitting in your chair and saying, okay, for the next 8 hours, I'm going to work through this sermon and get it done, I find that it's better if I take multiple runs at it. And so I work at it in a spurt, and then I come away, and then I come back, and I work on it again. That way it's fresh. And then also for me, early in the morning is when I'm the freshest. The afternoons are death to me in notes. And so if I wake up early before the sun comes up and work on my notes, that's the most productive time for me. I think more clearly during that time. So
yeah, I'm the same.
Yeah, I know most of the guys I talk to are that way.
Really?
So yeah.
Yeah, if you beat everyone else up, if you
beat them up,
if
so
you
that they don't distract you.
If you wake up before everyone else wakes up,
right.
There's just something that's just special, and I just find my brain starts sharp, and throughout the day gets foggy.
Well,
and
this
fuzzy.
is especially true for you with 3 kids at home. So
I'm at a stage when Okay, and finally, do you have any as you teach homiletics? What is your book that you assign to your students? Is there multiple books? And then any other recommendations for the Expositors Collective listenership?
In terms of books?
Yeah, books.
Yeah. So the textbook that I use is Biblical Preaching by Haddon Robinson.
Yeah, you mentioned that.
And Christ-Centered Preaching by Brian Chappell is amazing. It's also a really good book.
That is.
Those are the 2 top ones that I would recommend. And you're the book guy, man. You're better at making book recommendations.
Well, no one's recommended any books actually in all these episodes, so I figured you'd be the guy.
Oh my, those are at the top of my list. Those 2, Between Two Worlds by Stott is wonderful, and so that's one that I would recommend.
Hey! You've given 3 more book recommendations than any other person. Granted, I've never asked anybody else, but I basically wanted to know, what are you assigning your students to read? Yeah, and so it's Haddon Robinson and Brian Chappell, and
Between Two Worlds by John Stott.
Oh, that one as well too.
Oh yeah, for sure. That's a remarkable book. Great resource.
Okay, back in my day in Bible college, it was rare that you'd get assigned more than 1 book to read. So
well,
the academic
recommendations.
standard.
I have 1 textbook.
Okay.
and the other ones are recommendations that we go through.
Okay.
What I'm doing, what I try to get to with my homiletics class is, going through, hey, how do you find the big idea and all of that. But I'm really, most of our exercises are trying to get them actually preaching and and critiquing, and let's work on an introduction today. Let's work on finding the big idea in a text. Let's work on illustrating a text or whatever. And so that again, it's somebody told me one time that preaching is like teaching somebody to drive on a country road. Just get them behind the wheel and keep them out of the ditch.
Right.
And teaching is the same way. I mean, you just want the best way to learn how to teach and to preach is to do it. But obviously, you want to do it the right way.
Country road. Yeah. Yeah, and I think episode 1, David Guzik was talking about how your first 200 sermons are going to be bad.
Yeah.
And so just get them out of the way.
Right.
Take whatever opportunities you have to teach and preach, and try to make them not be bad.
Right.
Make them as least bad as possible. But, you're not going to find your stride or find your voice until 201.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And, another recommendation along that is that you need feedback.
Right.
And so, I'd mentioned, I thought my mom thought my first message was brilliant. Yeah. And I guarantee you she did.
Right.
But if I had my mom critique me all the time, that would be a big mistake. So you want to get people that will actually tell you the truth and have them listen to you.
Okay.
Give you feedback.
How do you find those people?
Ask people that you respect as good teachers.
Right.
Would you listen to this tape? Would you give me some feedback? People that you want to ask just the average person. Hey, what are your impressions of this? That might be good.
Right. Okay.
You stutter a lot. Or watch. If you're on video, okay, you stick your hands in your pockets all the time. You wipe your nose all the time. Whatever it is. I mean, all feedback is good. You want to pay attention to that.
That's good. I found Christians can be really quick to say, that really blessed me.
Right.
But then, you have to push in and say, okay, I'm glad it blessed you.
Right.
But what did not bless you?
Right.
What blessed you the least?
Exactly. Well, and some people are just incapable of that. Okay. They just cannot give. It's not that they can't give honest feedback, but they just can't bring themselves to be critical.
Yeah. Or perhaps maybe it's they don't want to criticize God's word.
Right.
And you're the bringer of God's word.
Yeah, perhaps it could be that. But find the people that...
But we need criticism.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think that if you find somebody that will actually tell you the truth, then it'll benefit you. So, but you got to be able to handle it.
Great.
So...
Well, cool. Thanks, Ted. Any final words to the Expositors Collective listeners?
I would just say anything that Mike Naglia tells you to do, you do that.
Wow. Kind of John 2 advice, isn't it?
Well, thanks for listening all the way to the end. Thanks once again to Ted for sharing his time and his life with all of us. All right, here's your final reminder. Make sure that you go to expositorscollective.com, that you follow the link, that you register yourself for the webinar, so that on Saturday morning, December 5th, 2020, you can be learning from Thomas Terry about just crafting, becoming the kind of person that God can use in the public proclamation of His Word. Expositorscollective.com, scroll to the bottom, follow the link, and get yourself signed up for the webinar. All right. I hope that this episode, the webinar, and all that we do at Expositors Collective helps you to grow in your personal study and your public proclamation of God's Word.